Hey Juan Pablo, Victoria. So when I think about the feeling world, two opposing images come up for me. On the one hand, feeling is kind of like our most direct way of knowing the world, like what's alive in the world. So I think about the sensations that come to you when you're walking outside in the dark, the wind, the sights, the sounds, the tingles, the temperature, all these sensations, and then how those sensations kind of morph into your curiosity, your alertness, your desire, your pleasure, your repulsion, comfort, discomfort, how the kind of sensations turn into emotions. And all these are kind of our sensors, right? Our sensors for staying connected to the outside world. And they can sort of pull and push. Um, and, I think of the the Mary Oliver poem, that line, you know, just let the small animal of your body love what it loves. There's that quality of a feeling on one. That's one picture. The other picture is maybe a little bit less cute than a small animal. It's how our feelings, when they flood, distort our perception of reality. So in some ways, they kind of detach us from what's out there. Um, they squash complexity, richness. They kind of bring us into sort of an inner soupy swirl tempest. They sort of bypass or cloud thought. Um, they jump us into our biases, our prejudices, our sort of deep culture stamped concepts, limited concepts. So these are these kind of two pictures of being drawn out and being able to sort of be one with the sort of living world and understand it, and another kind of to be kind of cut off and shut into ourselves. So I guess I think about, how do we mediate between those two poles of feeling, and how poles are never really opposites. They're more like, there's a thread, there's a snake biting its tail. There's this thread that connects them, and when I think about that, I think about how our feelings are just our way to know the world, right? How the world, how know the world, how sort of things come in, but also how we perceive, right? We perceive and interact also through our feeling life. So it's very social in that way. There's a sort of breathing, coming in and going out, and so when I think about that we need a pause between the breath, kind of in that yogic breathing where you need to emphasize the pause between the in and the out, so that the our feelings and our social engagements don't become like sort of this never-ending loop, positive or negative, but just this loop of something happens, we react, a reaction changes, sort of affects how we interact, and then there's another reaction, and it's just over and over again. So what's that space between the breath? What's that perspective we can have on ourselves in a loop? Can we recognize that we're in a loop? Can we see the sort of social loops that we're in? That to me seems like essential for helping not only ourselves as adults, but also teens kind of form that sense of self-concept of who am I? And anyway, just side note, this also makes me think about, when I think about loops, right? I read recently this article about this guy, Asa Raskin, who created the infinite scroll, which is that thing kind of like on YouTube that just keeps your feed going. It kind of creates sort of new content that you probably will like. And anyway, it was about how this guy kind of repents, feels really bad about having made that. And because he's seen the sort of damage done of like this being hooked in, right? Being this hooked into this, seemingly positive loop of like, oh, I like this, I'll like that, I'll like this, I'll like that. But there's no thought in there. There's no pause. There's just sort of a habit of feeling. And anyway, fascinatingly, he's kind of, sort of repented and wish he never did that, and has gone on to create a really interesting company, which is trying to create an AI language model that can communicate with like whales and stuff can have like almost a Google Translate for animals, which is fascinating. Anyway, I guess the other sort of important point that I'm thinking about here for teens is, in some ways you don't ever learn, you don't ever break out of a loop unless you hit rock bottom. And we don't want the teens that are in our care to hit the rock bottom, but there needs to be some kind of wall that they hit, that they recognize the loops that they're in and the sort of the social swirls that they're caught up in, and the sort of the unprocessed automatic feeling, reactionary feeling places that they get stuck in. So anyway, so I also think about ways to kind of help them wake up, help them see themselves in the black mirror, help them become more conscious and create better habits around how they interact in the social world, and really to make a decision about who they want to be in that world.
Some years ago, a teacher that I admired a lot actually told me that the most important subjects for high school students were music and sports. And I have to say that I agree with that. Not because we're giving more importance to some subjects or to some areas. At the end, we're trying to develop the whole human being. But because if I look back and remember how I was when I was a teenager in high school, I totally agree that like art, music, sports were the things that moved me the most. Of course, I like math and literature and things like that, but definitely the music that I used to listen to at that time shaped my inner self. Even till today. Like who I am right now is pretty attached to whom I was when I was a teenager, and the self that I developed, the identity. And identity comes from identifying. So you're trying to be original when you're a teenager, and you're trying to be different. Yes, but you're looking for that difference in other things, in a music band, in a sports team. You want to see that you're different to your parents, but because you identify with something else, something that maybe it's not your father or your mother's genre of music or their sports team, and I think that gives us a clue, a very special clue, that when you are able to go into the inner self, into this realm of feeling with the teenagers, you can actually help them shape their own self. So that's why I think that yes, music and sports are very important subjects, but actually anything that touches this feeling world, you can do it with math. You can do it with literature. You can do it with history. You can do it with geography. Things that inspire. We're building our models of what's like. What does it mean to be a good human being? And just as early childhood, when teachers, are asked to be kind of like a role model, an example, and everything. Well, same thing. It's not about really behavioral stuff any longer, but it's about, creating ideals with these teenagers. If you're able to ask the right questions, if you're able to offer the correct activities for them to develop a feeling of love and admiration towards an ideal, a social ideal, or an artistic ideal, or a mathematical ideal. Yeah, it doesn't matter. But if you're able to do that, then your teaching will be meaningful. If you're able to offer the right things for them to fall in love and to, instead of becoming cynical, become a person that wants to pursue that ideal, wants to share that ideal with other people, then that's when you become successful as a teacher. For teenagers, it doesn't matter what subject you're teaching. It doesn't matter if it's art, music, sports, math, or history. What you need to do is to let them experiment and to know and to fall in love with that ideal that is worth sharing with the rest of the world.
Okay, here goes. Let's see. It's 10:45 here p.m. I'm getting to this. I'm gonna make the deadline before midnight. So the question is, how can we help high school students mediate their construction of self-perception immersed in the social realm through feeling? So I'm taking that question to mean, how can we help them bridge their construction of self-perception while they are immersed in that feeling realm and that astral development of their individualities? Hold on, this thing is like not, okay, here we go. Sorry, that wasn't straight. So how do we help them mediate? Mediate is like to bridge or to bring together. Yeah, I think it's sort of that beginning of the relationship that they're going to have with this question of actively seeking to be fully expressed and liberated in the sense of practicing being who you are, right? That goes on forever. Okay, how do I come to this? The construction of self-perception while they're in the social realm, obviously, it almost feels like it's kind of, an oxymoron to be able to do this when you're immersed in the social realm because you're surrounded by others. And so, on the one hand, that provides the opportunity to be able to see yourself where you are mirrored or where you're not mirrored. And maybe those things could stand out through the feeling in which they're living in, by feeling I'm aligned with this or I'm not aligned with that. But I think there are things that make that complicated because, and I think for all of humanity, but in adolescence, the idea of belonging is really sometimes more important than knowing who you are. Like just that feeling of not being alone and having, somewhere a group to be with or to belong to is really important. And at the same time, everybody wants to be normal, but also unique. And so I think this sort of like you're rotating all these different hats that you're trying on. I think one way in which the mediation occurs is actually through the crush. This idea of actually falling in love with something, like for the first time for yourself, like different than your parents, different than your siblings. It could be, Duran Duran, or it could be, it could be basketball. It could be, the girl in my Spanish class, whatever. But actually feeling that something is so beautiful, you can't stop looking at it. You enjoy it so much, you can't stop doing it. You become kind of obsessed by it. I think that's the idea of the crush is one way in which we begin to mediate the construction of self-perception through immersion in the social realm and relationships to the world, right? That idea of we look outside of ourselves into the world and we find ourselves there. And we look inside ourselves to find the world. And so, I don't know. These are all things that are just coming to my head, and I'm sure they're very typical in Waldorf education. The other thing about self-perception, this is an interesting, I think, idea. It's kind of, maybe, I'm not sure I can language it right now, but I'm feeling that self-perception can be a felt perception. It can be a thought perception. It can be a will perception. Sometimes we don't know who we are until we start to do something and we realize, hey, this feels really good, or I'm really good at it, or I'm getting somewhere with it. And then you feel like you are being fully expressed and authentic in that moment. Sometimes you feel something and you're like, it's a yes in my body and I know it, or in my heart, right? Your heart knows. That people say your mind thinks, but your heart knows. And maybe even, why would the astral body, which is so steeped in feeling, be, I guess, assigned the duty of adolescence? Or I think it's a good question. I think the idea that feeling, okay, I'm going to throw this out there and I'm just thinking it up, but it seems to me maybe knowing how you feel about something is really hard to ignore. You may not really understand what your feelings mean, but you know how you feel. And that's not always the case for thinking. Like sometimes you might know what your thoughts are. You're thinking all the time. You're thinking, but you don't really know what you believe. You got a lot of thoughts, but what is true of that? With doing, we might be busy doing all these different things, but we don't really know how it all comes together and what are we creating, and the bigger picture. Oftentimes it's hard to know. You go to school all day, you're into classes, you're doing, it doesn't, you don't realize that you're doing all of that so you can, I don't know, pass 10th grade or whatever, whatever the ultimate goal is. I mean, you're doing it for that, but in the moment by moment situations, sometimes it's hard to know what you're really creating and sometimes we're creating things we don't even realize we're creating. With feeling, I don't know. It's, if you're really paying attention, you'll know what you're feeling. And sometimes you just can't ignore your feelings. When something's wrong. It's like your conscience, it's like your ethics, your morality. Those are all feelings. I think it's also part of realizing not just who I am, but who I'm not. And a lot of that may be through felt perception. Okay, I'm at 7 minutes. Those are my thoughts right now. And that's what I got. I hope you guys have a good night. Talk to you soon. Bye.